point in my life, I think as like a 12-year-old, that I didn't really care about anything else but the Atlanta Hawks. So, it's a thing for me. And I've been always curious about the sociology and the socio-cultural political questions that surround the city I grew up in, and the Hawks have always been really interesting to me. Over the years, I've gotten into arguments with colleagues. I remember one a few years ago, a colleague of mine who lives in Oakland, who insisted that, well, the NBA will never really prosper in the southeastern United States because of issues of race. And his theory is that white people in the South just aren't ever really going to embrace NBA basketball. And this is before the Grizzlies had their real nice run. And I was a little defensive about the theory, but also couldn't lie about the fact that a lot of the things that we read in Bruce Levinson's memo were things I think all of us had heard from people around Atlanta. It was an insensitive and an offensive missive, but at the same time, I don't think he's breaking any news when he says that, that there's an element of white Atlanta, or really more in the suburbs, that would prefer not to be in a setting that's predominantly black. I don't think that's a radical impression. I think the reason I found I got really compelled to write the piece, though, is whatever impressions of Levinson may have been correct about his perceptions, his prescriptions were all wrong. I mean, the idea that if you only play Leonard Skinnard, during timeouts, or put more white cheerleaders on the floor, or make sure that white people are dominating the kiss cam, that somehow a guy's going to come in from Alpharetta and say, oh, cool, now I can go to the games because there's a cheerleader, because they're playing AC/DC during timeouts instead of TI. It's ridiculous. I mean, so I think that was the revelatory thing about the piece was, this was the elephant in the room, and we talk about, it's the traffic. That's why people don't come. Really? I live in Los Angeles. It's pretty bad. People get to the game, Well, it's a college town. Really? Because you know what? You ever been to been to Big Ten country? I mean, they're really into their college sports there too. And so we kind of have this confluence of factors. Oh, there are a lot of transplants in Atlanta, so no one really grew up rooting for the Hawks. Well, LA's nothing but transplants. Phoenix is nothing but transplants, and the Suns have always done really well, and it's a city a lot like Atlanta in many respects. So, I was always been very curious of what is it about the very particular character of Atlanta and the Hawks that have always made this a tough sell. And so that's kind of why I pursued it.
Well, and Kevin, that leads me into, what I was curious about. When you were doing your research, I noticed some things in there that were kind of like wow moments for me as I read through it. One of which being about how the team doesn't really do that well as far as sales of their own merchandise and things of that nature, and the other teams in the league are supported much more when they come into town. Were kind of eye-opening to me. Were there any other things that you found through your research that were kind of wow moments for you?
What surprised me the most about the research is when I called up the numbers, I just assumed Atlanta was a bad NBA town, that people just weren't interested in professional basketball. Oh, they're into Tech, they're into Georgia, they're into, there's so many Auburn and Carolina alumni. I mean, look, if there's a university in the Southeast, chances are the biggest city outside of its own state is Atlanta. In fact, there was a whole section in the first draft of the piece where I talk about, I think, the number one city for University of Florida graduates outside the state of Florida is Atlanta. For Alabama graduates, Auburn graduates. It's incredible. So I thought, maybe that was it. And so then I call up the numbers from ESPN, and it turns out, no, actually, in All-Star game viewership, for instance, the NBA All-Star game, Atlanta is consistently in the top 3 or 4 markets in terms of viewership, even though, by the way, they don't have a major all-star on the team usually. In terms of NBA Finals broadcasts, among the non-participating cities, in other words, not Miami, not San Antonio, for instance, Atlanta's consistently in the top 4. And so what we're learning, what the shocking thing is, we all say, it's a bad pro basketball town. No. It's a good pro basketball town. It's a lousy Hawks town.
Exactly. And Steve Koonin referenced the athletic unicorn in the article and how the athletic unicorn won't come down to watch a game. And Levinson email depicts that you want 40-year-old white guys at the game, like you said earlier, more than middle to lower world class African Americans at the game. Do you feel that the Hawks, after what's went on with the help of Steve Koonin, will be able to get more African Americans to trust and believe in the franchise to bring their families to the games and support the Hawks? And if so, what are some things they're doing and planning to do to achieve this, to get more African Americans in there? Because obviously they're trying to market to African Americans rather than the 40-year-old white guys, and they realize it's not working. So what are they doing to correct this error?
I mean, the first thing they're going to do is they're going to get a new owner, right? It's amazing. So when I went to games this season to report, in some ways, and Dominique Wilkins always drills this in. When I talk to Neek, he thinks, look, just, it's not as, the disparity is not what you think it is his point. He's like, look, it's about quality of the product. It's about ownership, really. Like, black people, white people all want the same thing, right? They just want a winner, and they want, to know that the ownership group they're supporting, cares about the fans, cares about making the team successful, cares about the quality of the experience. So I think number one is a new owner will do a wonder of good. It's just going to do a whole lot. Specifically, I mean, I think one of the things, they're doing a bunch of things. I mean, everything from understanding how their new target audience, which isn't the Alpharetta unicorn, it's the millennial who lives in town. It's African American professionals. African American, one of the things that Koonin said that was really interesting is that all the research, and man, they do focus groups and data, is that African American women really enjoy going to Hawks games. And they'll often buy a single ticket and go and maybe meet up with friends or whatever. And yet there had been no effort whatsoever to engage that part of their clientele. Never have the Hawks, from a marketing standpoint, reached out to African American professional women and said, hey, you know what? Why don't we make this easier for you? How do you like to buy tickets? What do you like at the games? Whether it's food and beverage, whether it's just, the overall experience. I mean, what kind of stuff, how do you want your experience to be? And that's a huge part of marketing and branding, is just having enough respect for your customers to say, hey, what is it you want? Because chances are, the 27-year-old dudes who live in, East Atlanta, enjoy coming to these games, are big NBA junkies and, basketball dorks. And African American women probably aren't going to want what the Alpharetta unicorn wants. They don't want to hear Leonard Skinner during timeouts. Like, they're not going to, they're not bringing in the minivan with the three kids from Canton or Powder Springs, and no disrespect to anybody who lives in Powder Springs wants to go to Hawks games. But, so the Hawks, I think, just by virtue of just even acknowledging, hey, who are our customers? What do they want? Oh, you mean we keep going after the same old tired sponsors, rather than sponsors that actually speak to a younger and a more diverse clientele? You mean that we might want different beers, we might want different food than what, the 48-year-old guy who wants his Wangs? I don't know. So there are all kinds of, but these are small details, but if you think about it, yeah. You know what I also, as just a guy, when I'm not working, when I just go to games and it's baseball or football, which I don't cover, I want there to be food that I like. I don't like when I go to the concessions and it's just, I'm kind of a yoga LA healthy guy. I really appreciate when they can at least account for the fact that, I'm probably going to want something that's not fried. Can you help me out here? And some stadiums they do it, and some stadiums they don't. You know what? I'm much more likely to go back to places where they do it. And that's just an example of me. I'm not suggesting I'm the target audience, but I'm just a health guy. But I think that's the point, is looking at your clientele, looking at your target audience, looking at your constituency, and just saying, hey, how would you like this game experience to be? And saying, okay, you know what, and that person is not a 48-year-old dude from Duluth or Alpharetta. He's just not. And, to continue to, what kind of world is it where it's like, wait, the guy's told you no. Just, what, you're so desperate for the 48-year-old white client that you can't fathom the fact that actually your best customers and your most loyal customers and the ones you can really build from are younger, live closer to town, are more likely to be African American, are more likely to be probably in their 20s and 30s. And that's what they're doing.
Well, I think they're chasing that perception of money within that Alpharetta unicorn quote unquote demographic, and it, like you said, at some point you're beating your head against the wall and you got to get away from it. Now, another thing that we kind of thought was interesting about this whole thing is that there's no secret out there the Braves are moving on to a new stadium 13 miles up the road in Cobb County. Many of their Caucasian customers did not like coming down to watch games at Turner Field, situated in a neighborhood that they don't view as safe. Do you feel that the sentiment that we see with the Hawks is there with the Braves as well? And, is that something that, again, we'll say at the Alpharetta Unicorn that the Braves are dealing with as well?
No, man, we could do a whole show on this one. You want to talk about racing the Braves versus racing the Hawks versus racing the Falcons and Matt Ryan? I mean, that's what I love about Atlanta. I mean, we could do 5 shows on that.
Yeah.
No, and you know why? Because Major League Baseball isn't the National Basketball Association. It's interesting. The political orientations of people who follow Major League Baseball are not the same as they follow the NBA. Major League Baseball's clientele is significantly older. I mean, I can tell you guys that, when I talk to the ESPN, data people, I mean, again, we have people at ESPN who do nothing but kind of study trends of sports fans. What sports are they following? How old is the median age of each fan in each sport? And in baseball, they are Jurassic. They're old. And they're white, largely. And the NBA is a different clientele. It's a more diverse, it's a more in-town crowd. It is a more younger, even white folks who like the NBA tend to be more politically liberal. White folks who like the NBA tend to live closer to town. They tend to be kind of your, they often are your 30-year-old, your 32-year-old graphic designer who lives in the old Fourth Ward. Guys like that, right? They're your NBA heads. This is a different flavor of fans. I don't think we're going to see a situation where the Hawks are going to, famous last words, I don't see when their lease is up or the agreement with Phillips is up, if they do decide to build a new facility ever. I don't think it's going in Roswell. I got to be honest with you. I don't think it's going anywhere north of the perimeter. In fact, I'd be shocked if it were, I was shocked if it were any, farther north in Peachtree Battle. You know what I mean? Like, I just don't see that happening. This is an in-town product. And again, I question the sincerity of anybody who says that the reason they didn't go to Hawks games is because they didn't like go. Unsafe. Look, you take the freeway. You pull in on Baker Street. You go to that lot. I mean, I don't know. It's code to me. I think when people of a certain demographic say they don't like going to the game because they don't like the location, they're saying they don't like taking public transit, which, by the way, people who live in town do take public transit. There's a whole generation of in-town people who live in Midtown who are happy to take the train to a game. To me, it's code, and I think we know what the code is.
Exactly. But you know what kills me about that, Kevin, is this. But you're willing to park over in Vine City to go to a Falcon game. In the same on the same lot off Spreaker. But
it's the same site. It's the same site. And so it's ridiculous. It's code. I mean, I think I think, frankly, to be perfectly honest, it's more about the product and how they perceive the product. And also, I do think it's sort of this atavistic idea that I think there are a lot of people who still live in the age of Iverson. And for whatever reason, and again, we could do 3 shows on Iverson and his kind of cultural significance to the game and its brand and whatnot, right? But I do think there's still this atavistic, leftover impression of NBA that was sculpted very much between the years of, let's say, 1990, post-Jordan, pre-LeBron, if you will, or pre-LeBron prime. And it's the Palace, right? And it's Iverson, and it's cornrows, and it's all these cultural signals that I think. And by the way, I'm not suggesting that if you're a white sports fan in Atlanta and you don't go to Hawks games or you don't care for the NBA or it's not your thing, that this is why. But I just reject the idea that it's the location. Where does hell, if you put it in Roswell, we'd all be going to Hawks games. Baloney. It's baloney. I just don't buy it.
What you said. You know what I say, Kevin? The Hawks have a great in-arena presentation with Ryan Cameron on the PA system, Sir Foster playing tunes on the organ, and Big Tigger is your in-house DJ. And plus, they have catchy time out entertainment that Ryan Cameron and those guys coordinate. So, and your article said it, the Hawks attendance is up by 2,000 this year, even after what Levinson and Ferry said. So, how can the Hawks continue on this momentum they have with these 3 guys in-house and can help garner more support from their target demographic and, make more people come out and support the team when they're in the arena and love the experience? It's like, hey, I want to come back for more of this.
Well, I think part of it is, and look, it's interesting because I think even good marketing people will tell you when you do a stunt like Tinder Night, I don't think a hell of a lot of people are going to change their plans to go to Tinder Night, though I think a good number did. I mean, I think it attracted